Job creation and skills development is a focus now with my next guest, Michael Adeleye. He's a human capital development consultant. Michael, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining me on the program. So that conversation is a conversation I know we're going to have for a very long time, especially as we're expecting more figures from the National Bureau of Statistics with regards where we are at in terms of number of those, percentage of those unemployed, about 13.3% at the moment. That's unemployed. And of course, the figure for underemployed is almost close to that number as well. But the major issue highlighted here is skills. Most employers these days are looking for graduates who have something to offer them or something they can work with. They can even build, mold into what they want. But at this time, there's a serious skills gap. I beg your pardon, skills gap. How do you think, in looking at the framework now and listening to what the Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, has said, what framework do you think is needed to be built, to be looked at this time, to build skills?
Thank you very much. I think I've emphasized on this issue quite a few times. If we're talking about unemployment, and we're talking about jobs, I can tell you as an employer of labor and also as a human capital development expert, I can tell you there are tens of thousands of jobs available. But the problem is we don't have the right skill of people to actually occupy those positions. You have a number of vacancies lined out, being sent out by employers, but they couldn't find people to actually occupy those positions. Now, my take on this is we have to look into our educational system, where we have to overhaul the whole system to bring in people that actually produce skilled graduates. Now, all our graduates that we have, our majority of them are half-baked. When you speak to some of them, you begin to wonder and actually say, did this person actually go through the four corners of education or university? Now, we need to look into the educational system, the curriculum that we have at the moment, to actually say that people are actually going through what we need to go through, as in what to study. The curriculum needs to be looked into in the first place. Secondly, the government has a policy in place that is now effectively implemented. There is a policy which says every employer that has over 5 staff should train their staff. Now, majority of our employers are not investing in training their staff. So obviously, their fear is, if I train this person or these people and they leave my employment, then I'm losing out.
Well, Mike, you have to remember that most of these employers are also trying to make money. So, but yes, you are very right.
Yeah.
But you should also remember that the Industrial Training Fund Act, which came into effect on October in 1971, was to, among other things, establish a fund to be utilized to promote and encourage acquisition of skills in industry or commerce in Nigeria. How much do you think this ITF has actually achieved what it was set up for?
They're moving towards the right direction, but at a very slow pace. Because I can tell you, I personally haven't anything to engage with them in that area of training. Okay? Now, I actually see that that channel, as an area whereby they have to put in all the mechanism in place to actually get involved and get in contact with every single employer, which they are not doing at the moment. Okay, that is one thing. Now, if we talk about employers themselves, what are the government doing to employers to encourage them to employ staff? Now, we should be talking about tax incentives. If I'm an employer and the government says to me, employ XYZ number of people, we'll give you XYZ incentive, that if you train and employ the staff, we will give you such an incentive, or give you a corporation tax incentive, or VAT cuts. Then I'm going to be able to say, okay, if this is going to be an encouragement for me from the government, then I'm going to do it. Now, the confidence of employers is gone, it's lost. Now, the government is doing everything they could to actually tackle this unemployment menace. But the problem is, the public sector shouldn't be the largest employer of labor. It should be the private sector. Now, the public sector, so the government should begin to put more incentive into the private sector, look into the shortfall of employers and begin to encourage them to actually support them in this fight against unemployment.
Well, before we get to that, yes, the private sector, even for the first quarter of 2015, according to the Bureau of Statistics, the private sector still was the largest employer of labor. But because of the challenges in the economy, the macroeconomic headwinds, dealing with inflation, dealing with currency issues and security issues and the rest of it, you find that most of these companies are either reluctant because you don't have any means to produce anyway, so your productivity is low, your output is low, you can't employ. But to still encourage the private sector to take up that role, key role of helping of employing more of young undergraduates, young unemployed Nigerians. Do you think, for instance, that apart from incentives, do you think, for instance, there can be an apprenticeship kind of scheme? So, for instance, you volunteer, companies actually advertise and ask you to volunteer, and if you fit the bill after you volunteer for them, they incorporate you into their organizations.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think it's one of the my advocacy in this country about apprenticeship scheme. Now, I've spoken quite a few times about this issue. It's not a culture, or it's not in this culture, so people are not really aware of the benefits of going to do voluntary work. Now, when you go into university from day one and you don't volunteer, it's so absurd that someone graduated after 5 years and you can't boast of working or work experience of just 6 months or 1 year. Now, if the government, I think the government should try to institutionalize this apprenticeship scheme into all our educational system, whereby, but it's got to be on three parts. It's not just the government. It has to be government involvement, it has to be parental involvement, and it's got to have to be the populace involvement as well. The government will say, okay, if you go out there to volunteer, look, the government has a policy whereby they say they're going to pay 5,000 naira in their last, mantra during the electioneering campaign season. 5,000 to graduates. Now, why don't they channel this 5,000 naira, okay, to people that goes out to volunteer? Go volunteer once you finish your school, even during when you're the period of studying or when you graduated. Go and volunteer with any employers out there. Then the government will pay that 5,000 towards your expenses, that maybe your transportation or so on and so forth. Now, if you're good, loyal, dedicated, and productive, the employer could say, okay, let me give you something else on top of that for you being a productive person in my organization. What happens after volunteering? Now, at the end of your volunteering season, maybe 1 year, if you're good, productive, and loyal and dedicated, two things is either the employer will say, okay, when you finish your volunteering, I'm going to employ you. That is automatic employment. Even if the employer doesn't employ you, you will have on your resume which says, I worked with this company, ABC, for 1 year. So that apprenticeship scheme is one thing that I think the government should look into deeply. If you have 1 million graduates today goes out there to volunteer, you say, the government will say, this is what we're going to do, this is the policy. Then the parents have a duty to their children to say, right, okay, go out and do this thing. These are the benefits of volunteering. If you go through apprenticeship scheme, you gain the experience, you have obviously showcased the quality that you have with you to the employer. Then there are chances that you're going to get automatic employment, or you have that practical experience that you're going to be able to use to other employers as well.
But then, Michael, there's actually also this challenge of the available jobs versus the available schemes.
Yeah.
So how many of these such schemes, volunteer schemes we have? We had You Win, that was actually launched, but we had
the GIS,
and we had a number of those schemes. But how many, employers, particularly in the private sector, actually look at using that particular way of getting young hands, young brains to mold them maybe into what they can use, or what actually somebody can stand alone as an entrepreneur?
I think, for example, let's put this into perspective. If I study microbiology, for example, as a graduate, I can go to a pharmaceutical company, okay? I could go to, as a chemist or as a microbiologist, I could go to a food manufacturing processing company, and to go there to volunteer, for example.
Not with the mindset that I'm going to make as much money as I can, but just because I want to learn, I will make myself available, pliable rather. That
is the awareness the government has to put in place in the first place. Now, it's not just like, okay, I'm going there to make money. You're going there to actually showcase yourself, the qualities that you have in you, to that employer. So the government has a mantra to put that in the public, like, look, this is what we're going to do. Go and volunteer to showcase what you have, and that employer as well has to be looked after as well, because it's a cost to employer who takes on volunteers. So the government would say, take on this number of people, or each graduate you take on to train as an apprenticeship, we will give you X, Y, Z, or we will support you. Then also to that employee or that job seeker will take about Naira a month. Okay, so obviously it's a two-way thing. Then the parents has a duty to actually be able to speak and address their children. Like, look, go and do this. We will support you as well.
So in the very short term, a development plan that will focus on these key areas is what we need at this time.
Absolutely.
All right, Michael, thank you so much for coming on the program this morning. Of course, sharing your perspectives with us on job creation and, of course, skills development.
My pleasure.